I will just briefly introduce the meeting, thanking you, first of all, for joining us for this webinar. It's a pleasure to see that the performance has led us to ask questions and that you have accepted our invitation to discuss and dialogue. As you might know, Agnes of God was conceived from the start to be a project which goes beyond the theatrical production. Its aim was always to serve as a vehicle to instigate questions and reflection. Today, we will be focusing on the ethical issues which the play brings to the fore. Was Mother Superior doing the right thing in keeping Agnes protected? Was Agnes morally responsible to the murder of the baby? What about Dr. Livingston? Was she right in persisting to dig deeper into Agnes's life? These are just some of the questions which we will try to explore today. With us, we have Carlo Calleja, a Catholic priest who has a doctorate in moral theology, and Gail Debono, who is a psychologist and a member of the Malta Humanist Association. The plan is very simple. We won't make it too formal. We'll start with 2 interventions of 15 minutes each from our guests, and then we'll open the floor for reactions and further discussions. Okay, so unless there are questions, I can pass on the word to Carlo.
Okay, so hello everybody, good evening. Thank you first of all to Christian Colombo and to Tyrone Grima for organizing this really beautiful event, this great initiative. I'm honored to be taking part in it and to share my reflections on this play, Agnes of God. And I'd like to start precisely with this, how much I'm really appreciating this moment of coming together to discuss and to dialogue together as believers and non-believers. As I've said also in another article I wrote on precisely on this initiative, I had mentioned how this is not the first opportunity. Obviously, there have been many others who have done so before. So most famously, there was, for example, the Archbishop of Milan, Cardinal Carlo Maria Martini, who had published a book together with Umberto Eco, in which Umberto Eco, who describes himself as a non-believer, and they had published their correspondence, their letters to each other, where they reflected on what it means, what does the truth mean, what does it mean to live in a society today, and what place does God have, or what place does belief have in today's society. And I remember while I was reading this book, I was really impressed by how they carried forward their conversation with a sense of humility, with a sense of great respect towards each other. So it was something that I found really, really inspiring. Then there were others, for example, another cardinal, Gianfranco Ravasi, who had started the famous Courtyard of the Gentiles, where it was an initiative which I think had started also in Malta, where they would bring together believers and non-believers and discuss together. The idea was to have a kind of, what would you call it, like cross-fertilization or cross-pollination, so that believers learn from non-believers, while non-believers learn from believers. And in a way, I see that this, in some way, goes on. For example, Dr. Livingston and the Mother Superior, who Mother Superior we would expect is the one who believes, the believer. But at the same time, even she has her moments of doubt. And on the other hand, also the psychiatrist, Dr. Livingston, whom we would expect to be the non-believer and who states, she says, no, I've stopped believing in God, I'm a lapsed Christian or Catholic. But then in fact, you start seeing that somehow she still believes, because you can see that she still, perhaps if she does not articulate clearly her faith in God, at least you can say that at least she still believes that things can turn for the better. She still has like a speck of faith in her, a speck of hope which you can define as one of the hallmarks of a Christian. Then there was also, the list continues going on. For example, Cardinal Ratzinger, before he became Pope Benedict, that famous dialogue with Jürgen Habermas, the German philosopher who had described himself as tone deaf to faith, tone deaf to faith. But at the same time, he was able to continue a conversation and to say, what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses of living in a society where there is religion? And the same thing, obviously, in an opposite way, therefore, focusing on the effects of a healthy kind of secularization is what Pope Benedict had very often and frequently spoken about. And then most recently, Pope Francis, in his discussions with an old friend of his, Eugenio Scalfari, the editor of La Repubblica. There again, there were some letters that they had sent each other. Their correspondence was published, and you can see how sometimes even Pope Francis, in fact, sometimes was criticized by certain news outlets, certain Christian news outlets, because they would say that he is being too liberal or to this or to that. But actually, as I said also in my article, I think he was simply staring into the eyes of mystery together with Eugenio. He isn't anymore the pontifex, the Pope there, but he is just Jorge, thinking about what he believes in, ultimately what he thinks, that trying to articulate his faith as a simple man. Once again, I'm really enjoying this initiative. I can go on to speak about the moral issues related to this play, in particular about moral responsibility. Can we speak about moral responsibility here when we have a person, Agnes, the novice, who it seems had a background of abuse, of child abuse, and therefore can we hold her responsible for her actions? I think that just to mention a conclusion here, and perhaps we can go a bit more into discussing it a bit further, perhaps you can say that I think it is more the responsibility of the people around her. There we have a woman who was weak, who's very weak. A woman who, because what she has passed through, might not have the moral agency that we would expect out of another person who has not passed through such experiences. And therefore, it isn't simply a question of saying, no, she is not guilty. No, she did not commit a sin. But it goes much more than that. Who is responsible for this? Am I responsible for anything, for the wrongdoings of others as well? It is not fair on a particular individual only. We also have to look at the rest of society as well, since we live in a network of relationships. We speak of structures of sin, right? It isn't only an individual who commits a grave evil, but usually there is also a whole network of persons who lead a person to commit something that is evil. I think I can stop here for now, and then we can develop. I mean, I have much more to say, but we can perhaps discuss this as we go along, as the conversation develops.
So thank you, Carlo. Just a small point. I think at one point you were touching the microphone with your hands.
Yes, could be. Okay.
Just to tell you.
Okay, thank you.
I think it's a very interesting point. That's one that you raised, that there is not a single person who is responsible frequently, but it's like the community around that person who is responsible. So yes, that I think warrants a lot of further discussion. Okay, so I pass the word now to Gail.
Thank you. I'd like to start by thanking both you, Christian, and Tyrone as well for inviting me and involving me in this extremely interesting project. I've really enjoyed being a part of it from the very start. And of course, the performance, I'm pretty sure you've heard from everybody who was there, was exceptional. So thank you. Carlo, I'm really glad you touched on this point. First of all, I want to say that I like the fact that you said these debates are very important and that they're based on respect. Had we not had respect for one another, these debates would not be possible. We see on a day-to-day basis that debates are a flop on national television, for example, when people disrespect each other totally, either by saying the wrong thing or talking out of place or so on. So I want to thank you for agreeing to take part. I am, while I was watching, naturally the psychologist in me, while I was watching the play live, I was thinking, this is what she's going to ask next. This is what I specifically purposely refrained from reading the script beforehand, okay, even though I had access to it. So you're right regarding the actions of Agnes. They are not just the actions of Agnes. They are the result of the circumstances by which Agnes arrived at the point of being in a monastery, living as a nun, and giving birth and killing that child. From a psychological perspective, there was the sexual and psychological abuse as a child that she suffered. And it is made much worse by the fact that it came from a primary carer, a person who was supposed to protect her from such eventualities. This was also together with, and then also followed by, alienation from the world. So we are told that Agnes is so innocent, she's never even been outside, she doesn't know anything about the outside world. And rather than then we see Agnes growing into the outside world and attempting to adapt, she was put in a convent. So she was completely alienated from the outside world from the get-go. And you can see her innocence. You can see that there are many things. It came out really well. It was portrayed very well, actually, by the actors. But you can see that there are many things that Agnes is not privy to. Many things which are obvious to people who of a certain age and certain experience in the world are not. After that, she naturally developed the shame and the guilt and the distorted sense of self that one develops from abuse, especially when the abuse, I will say it again, comes from somebody who is meant to install self-esteem in a person, such as a mother. It is from your parents, it's from the adults who care for you that you gain your self-esteem, you garner your self-esteem as you are growing up. So if your mother is saying you are useless, and I can't remember the terminology exactly that she used during the play, but I remember one of them was, you are useless, you are nobody, you are nothing. So through that, she developed an internal sense of shame and guilt and a distorted sense of who she really is. She had no tools of coping. She was never taught how to cope with anything in life. She was sheltered, with the exception of being given religion, which can be a very good tool to use to cope. But in her case, she was only given that. She was given nothing else. And then, as a result of that, she saw everything through the eyes of religion, because she knew no other way of seeing things. So in this case, as we see by the end of the play, religion was not the answer, didn't factor into it, with the exception of the location where the rape happened. In our sense, tawna sense li ġrat hemmhekk stess, għax bit-tajt there was a man in a field and so on. Although in the original, I read later, it was when she went away, some 9 months earlier. But there was a lot of, is this a religious issue? Is this not? Is this something transcendental that happened to Agnes? Whereas naturally the psychologist and the atheist in me was like, no, there's a woman who gave birth and there's a dead baby, and the woman is claiming she does not remember giving birth. Now, if that is a primary
Gail, can you hear us? Carlo, you
Yes.
can continue building on
Okay.
this point, please.
Sure. I think Gail started, I think, bringing up a very important point, the place of religion in guilt and shame, and perhaps also the place of mystical experiences. So in fact, one of the questions that I was asked when I was asked to participate in this was, what responsibility do we have when a person has mystical experiences, is going through mystical experiences? It is a bit hard to, I think that sometimes it is hard to make a clear distinction between what is a mystical experience and what is due to a psychiatric issue. This is something that obviously Gail can tell us a bit more about. However, at the same time, we cannot say that there isn't a distinction at all. First of all, we can almost quote also the Bible, where it says, you will recognize them. I was referring obviously to other cases, to another situation, but Jesus says, you will recognize them. You will recognize who is my disciple from their fruits. In other words, from the kind of fruits that they produce. So if you have a case where evil is being done, it cannot easily be attributed to mystical experiences. So that is something that can be ruled out immediately, where you have a case of a person who is committing something that is overtly evil, and then claiming that he or she is doing it under mystical effect. That is, we cannot do we cannot reach such a conclusion. And then, I mean, this is something that the church always looks at in great detail when there is an issue, and they think that there is, when somebody states that he or she is under mystical influence, either because of apparitions or anything else, the church studies it in a lot of detail, and it employs usually psychiatrists, psychologists, and many other people from the various sciences to see what is really happening over there. And in fact, there are specific guidelines of discernment that are obviously issued by the church. So mystical experience, now something else, touching a bit on what Gail was mentioning about guilt. It is true that perhaps for too many years or centuries, the church has focused so much on guilt that perhaps many people have conflated the two ideas, the church and guilt, and perhaps have also used the church to their advantage to try and impose guilt on others, or try and bring the people to do something that they want, and claiming that this is being claimed by the church. This means that the church also has to pass through a lot of purification, but also we also have to make a distinction between what is culture and what is related to the church. In fact, I was just thinking, sort of, can we relate? I'm seeing that Gail came back, but I'm picking a bit on your points, on the points that you've raised. I was thinking whether we can deal with the three characters of the plot of the play, not in terms only of individuals, but also, let's say, in terms of the Maltese culture. So if you have, for example, the Agnes representing the traditional Maltese culture, which over the past 10 or 20 years has undergone such a big change, such a very fast change, that it is passing through what I would call like an adolescent rebellion, trying to make do with anything that has to do with religion, and then perhaps reaching erroneous conclusions, while perhaps the mature way would be to try and sift things and to try and see what is really helpful and what is really related to culture, and perhaps it might be time to now grow out of, perhaps. I'll stop here for now.
Okay, so let me pass back the word to Gail.
Sorry about that. I have no idea what happened. Anyway, I got cut off. So I was actually coming to my conclusion. I was telling you about my psychological observations of the play, where I said I was talking about Agnes, and I said that so the play was being taken from a religious perspective, perhaps because of the setting of the play. However, there was a murder, which we all knew there was, and there was a mother who gave birth, which we knew, that was obvious, and then there was a mother who was saying that she doesn't remember giving birth, which, had there been no clouding of judgment, you'd think, okay, why do you not remember giving birth? As a psychologist, the psychologist in me there said, okay, there's trauma there. There's trauma to do with the birth. So what I'm saying is, like, even the atheist psychiatrist at one point wavered in her judgment. I'm saying that it came out a lot, how much it can cloud people's judgment. Now, I'm not anti-religion, as in myself, I'm not a believer at all. However, especially as a psychologist, I believe that somebody's spirituality is extremely important in their life. And I think that it is very important for us to be spiritual. And of course, religion is a part of spirituality. So I'm not anti-religion at all. As stated in one of the questions that I answered in the run-up to the show, I do, however, have a problem with religion being placed or being given a remit where it has none, such as, for example, in this case, where there was a murder, it was a clear murder, and the Mother Superior was allowed to interfere far more than she should have been allowed in the psychiatric evaluation. Naturally, it's a play, it's written for the benefit of people watching. However, this is what we are discussing today, so I have to mention it. Right. I have much more to say, naturally, but I really want to get into an in-depth discussion on this. However, I don't want to lead the discussion one way or another. I don't know whether, Carlo, you've got something to say in response, and then we can.
All right, so Carlo, have a few minutes to react to what Gail just said. And then I would like to open up the discussion between everyone.
Okay, so I agree with you a lot about what you said with regards to the Mother Superior and the way in which she used religion in order to overprotect perhaps her, who turns out to be her niece, correct? Yeah, I mean, that is where, I mean, becoming responsible for each other really comes in. I mean,
I don't see anything fundamentally wrong with Mother Superior doing what she thought was best, because don't forget, she is coming from a religious perspective. It's almost all she knows now, because she was married, she had 2 kids, we heard in the play, but this is her life now. And quite frankly, Agnes was entrusted to her in her life as Mother Superior of the convent. So I can't blame her for protecting her as Mother Superior of the convent. What I would not have done, I mean, apart from the abuse and whatever else came, is entrust her into a convent when it was not of her own volition.
Yeah, perhaps. Well, it is much more complicated than that, perhaps, because she might have been in a convent that was, well, in that kind of convent. I agree with you. In a convent where she is completely detached from reality and so on. Yes, definitely. I mean, she wasn't given the chance to really grow as a person, to flourish. Her development was stunted, definitely.
We can see that from a psychological perspective. Again, we can see that from her lingo, the way she speaks of herself, the way she speaks of in fact, when she was hypnotized, the lingo in the memories did not change. It did not change into somebody who was 20 years younger or 10 years younger. It remained the same. That is how much that is one of the primary symptoms of stunted growth.
Right.
Which we witness a lot of when I work with a lot of trauma patients. Trauma is one of my expertise. And you see a lot of stunted growth in the way, for example, a 25 or a 30-year-old would speak in the lingo of a teenager, for example. And I think we saw that in the, I mean, this is why I said it was portrayed so well. I was extremely impressed by the actors.
Probably, exactly. I mean, I don't know whether you would agree with me, but it is probably much easier to portray a person who has passed through trauma than, I mean, because the church is so, at the same time, so diverse as well. There are, I mean, in a way, I mean, Mother Superior represents the stereotypical church. And it isn't always possible to pin it really on the, I mean, it is not always a precise descriptive of the church, perhaps. Can you unmute? Okay.
Sorry, I thought I pressed it. I said she was not that stereotypical, considering that she had been married and had 2 kids. Right. So it's not the norm for a nun. So right. In essence, we have here, Mother Superior of a convent who's acting as Mother Superior of a convent, but she also knew the ways of the world. Mm-hmm. What she did not know, to her credit, is that the child had been abused, because that was news to her. She learned when we learned that Agnes had been abused. So to her credit. However, I mean, did she choose to see everything through a religious perspective and not get Agnes to a doctor? Or was she just, this is my new normal now? Agnes is in a convent, this is the way we do things, yeah.
At a certain point, she says, you have sacrificed what we have sacrificed in faith, we have gained in logic. But at the same time, what I mean is, I think that the author tried to put many things in the Mother Superior, which in fact might perhaps you would need to parse out in many different persons who represent various aspects perhaps of the church as well. But anyway, we can continue this conversation later, perhaps. Chris?
So let me open up the floor, because of course, yes, we can continue, but it's nice to hear some reactions. So I think you have the option to raise your hand. Feel free to do so, or just start talking.
I would like to be the first person to intervene, if that's okay, Chris.
Obviously,
of course. I'll be taking it very much also from the play point of view, because the issues that both Gail and Carlo have been discussing, which are cardinal points, very important points, I'm happy that they brought them to the fore, are obviously the issues that we discussed during the rehearsal process, myself with the 3 actors. In fact, there's Isabel Warrington over here who played the part of Mother Superior, so perhaps she'll have something to say from her perspective too. And what's interesting is that even within ourselves as a team, as a cast, we also had different opinions about different things. So some of us are more tilting towards believers, others more towards non-believers. There was quite a healthy mixture, which also enriched the process even further. On my end, I'm a believer, but there were members of the cast who had different opinions about that. So even when it came, for example, to Agnes's experience, was it mystical, was it not? We engaged a lot in this sort of discussion and the role that religion has, how oppressive religion can be, how much religion can be the cause that, as Gail earlier on discussed, can be the reason that stops the growth and the psychological well-being of the person. So these are all issues that we discussed. So let's take the bull by the horns, because Gail mentioned this at a point in time. What happens to Agnes? Interestingly enough, we remained faithful to the script itself. Those of you who are familiar with the film version, which is written by the same person, by the same playwright, but adapted for the screen, and possibly for a more commercial audience as well. Somehow the film, I think, highlights the mystical element a bit stronger than the play does. The play is slightly more grounded. And that is the point I'd like to get to. One of the things that I did not agree with the cast in our discussions, and we left it as a disagreement on purpose. So my modus operandi was, whenever we discuss one of these philosophical themes, it was like everyone will express his or her opinion, and our point is not to convince each other. It's ultimately the richer and the more divergent these opinions, the better. My opinion till last Saturday, ironically enough, so this actually shifted, not in the rehearsal process, but after the third performance, I was totally convinced that what Agnes experienced was a mystical experience. I had no doubt of that from my perspective, even as a director. But the more I engaged with the play and the more I watched the performances, this led me to a change where I realized that what I believe ultimately, because all this is up to interpretation, that the understanding of the playwright's notion of mysticism, I could ask him because he's still alive and I was in correspondence with him, but I don't know if I should. But anyway, is that what the three characters go through is to identify the illusions that they've had in their life. So obviously, Agnes, possibly unconsciously in her case, used religion, as Gail was saying, as a way to cope with her trauma, with her abuse. So obviously it was used in a very unhealthy way. Mother Superior went through a whole life of failure. She failed as a mother, she failed as a wife, and up to a certain point she's failing now as a Mother Superior because things are getting out of hand. And so she latches onto the voice and on the illusion of having a saint in her convent to give her some form of hope in life. And up to a certain point, Dr. Livingston as well latches onto psychiatry and onto knowledge to give sense to the failures that she has had in her life, her relationship with her own mother, the death of her sister, and the other disappointments she had. And what especially the two main characters go through is this detachment, this groundedness. So by the end of the story, Mother Superior realizes that it's an illusion and she just has to burst the bubble. In fact, there's that very powerful speech at the end where she addresses Dr. Livingston. She thanks her for breaking her illusion, but then she tells her, you should have been the one to have died and not your sister. So she hasn't yet reconciled totally. Whereas also the psychiatrist doesn't reconcile totally, but there's this shift in her case towards relying less on knowledge and possibly relying more on faith, giving even the impression that she's actually resorted to the sacraments at the end, in that famous line, you beat an eyelid and you miss it, where she says, I made my confession. So basically, the way I see it is that there is this importance of groundedness. So some mysticism, which is all saintly and flying angels and what have you, there's no levitation here, but it's actually coming to grounds with the sometimes even sordid reality of life, which might be uncomfortable to accept, and which is perhaps the only way forward for us to grow. That's my 2 cents about it.
Thank you, Tyrone. Some other reactions from the floor?
I have a question. I think it would go to Gail. My question is, to what extent, in the play, Gail said that religion was her only tool, was Agnes's only tool that she could use to protect herself. Yet, the way I see it, I think religion was used as a tool to oppress her further or punish further. That's my 2 cents worth, really.
In my opinion, David, the intention of the Mother Superior was not to oppress and punish. Again, from my experience, I think it was her mother's intention, yes, when she gave her to her sister's care, thinking, let her be locked up in a convent, so to speak. Naturally, this is all imagined because the mother is dead by the time we get to the play. But I don't think that the Mother Superior set out to, I think that she had a lot of affection for Agnes, and I think that they portrayed that extremely well, in the sense that you as an audience develop an affection for Agnes, despite the fact that there were a lot of moments where you get frustrated at the situation. You can't help but feel affection for this innocent victim of her circumstances. With regards to religion being the only tool, it wasn't one person's doing. It was the fact that she was first abused, and very heavily so, and then entrusted into a convent, and therefore she just did not have the chance to develop anything. She never needed anything else. Had she not been raped, she would have been fine. She would have had her demons to deal with, and she would need psychological help and whatever, but she would not have been a murderer, so to speak. The murder was a result of the rape, which was a result of her being in the convent, which was a result of her having been abused before. If you know what I don't know whether I'm making myself.
Yes, I don't think we can blame that bit onto Mother Superior, in the sense that I don't think that Mother Superior had much of a choice, because if she did not accept her into the convent, goodness knows what would have happened to this girl. Possibly worse things. I don't know. It's all hypothetical, of course. So I think Mother Superior's blame, if anything, perhaps Izzy can say more about this, is the fact that she ironically overprotected her. I'm saying ironically because Mother Superior says that she did not protect her own children, and possibly that's why she overprotects Agnes, because the fact that she protected her children and it led to her failure as a mother, now's the turn to reverse the situation and to experiment with the other style of parenting, sort of, with still a disastrous result in reality. But I think her intentions were partially good, I would say. I don't know, Izzy, if you have any
Yes,
about...
I mean, the way I sort of understood Mother Superior was that she was a person who all her life struggled with her own self-esteem. First, she said she felt like a failure as a wife and mother. She said as early as 6 years old, she kind of lost that self-esteem in herself. Because there was a speech where she said that till the age of 6, she used to speak to her guardian angel. And then for some reason, at 6 years old, she stopped listening, she says, and the angel stopped speaking. Now, I don't know what that actually referred to, this business of the guardian angel. As she said, it could have been like the invisible friend, the invisible playmate that some children have. But it was something that gave her some kind of comfort in whatever way, shape or form, but it gave her some comfort. And from then, she actually says, my life was very bleak from the age of 6. So something in her life made her really have very low self-esteem. Then she got married and had 2 children. She felt a failure in that as well. And once she became a widow, she thought, okay, let me try spirituality. Let me see if spirituality will help me. And even that, and in a way, her overprotection of Agnes was maybe a way that she felt she could make amends with this, with the fact that she felt she was a failure with her own children. So she overprotected her, and I believe that she had a lot of affection for Agnes, and she wanted to help her. She didn't want her to go down the same route that her younger sister had gone. So I really felt that the character of Mother Superior all throughout the journey that she made with the psychologist through the trial with Agnes was she was struggling with her own demons, her own lack of belief in herself, even, because I really feel that spirituality for her was her last resort, because she kept saying, and there was one scene where she kept saying, I'm trying to convince even the psychologist, but I want to believe in miracles. I want to believe in this mysticism. I want to have this sort of innocence, so to speak, and belief in this faith, this unquestioning faith. And in the end, she lost it when she realized, I mean, this was all, at the end of the day, it was whatever it was, a rape, or even it might have been just an innocent encounter that she had with a field hand, with some kind of a person who she crossed thoughts with. I personally, as Isabel and not as Mother Miriam, my take on the play was that Agnes had no mystical revelation or whatever. It had nothing to do with mysticism. That it was just an innocent encounter. She ended up having sex with somebody and she got pregnant. And, there was the shame. She didn't want to talk about it to anybody because she felt this terrible shame that was instilled in her from a child by her mother who abused her. And her mother herself was really psychologically damaged because, I mean, the things that she did to her. And I think that she left Agnes in the care of her older sister, who was a nun, was because she genuinely thought, okay, I've gone astray and I'm a hopeless case. I'm hoping that in this protected, safe environment, she's going to not go down the route that I went and end up, a very flawed human being. So my take on the whole play is that there was no mysticism. I mean, this was a conversation we had during rehearsal. I mean, I am a non-believer. I believe in spirituality and it's very important to me, but I'm not a religious person. I was baptized and brought up as a Catholic, but I'm not, I don't consider myself a Catholic anymore. And I believe that we should always question our faith. I think it's very important to question and to evolve as well, because I think that's part of our journey as human beings. Our spiritual journey should question everything, I think. I don't believe in the way I was brought up as a Catholic was, no, you believe, you do not question the faith. The faith is this big mystical thing that you know nothing about. And my take on the Catholic religion, the way I was brought up, was that it was there to keep you, in darkness so that it could control you in whatever way it saw fit. Sorry if I'm offending anyone, but that is my experience, obviously, of it.
Can I reply?
Yes.
So I agree with you. That's the way I was brought up as well. So I was brought up with the exact same notions. Eventually realized that I did not believe any of it. But yes, that's the way I was brought up in the sense of religion. I'm very interested in two of your perspectives that I saw differently. One was you saw Agnes's mother as putting her in the care of her aunt as an act of care, whereas I interpreted it as a kind of fobbing off. And also in the end, you said maybe it was an innocent sexual encounter. And from the reaction that I saw when she was being hypnotized, where she was saying, get away from me, don't approach me, I interpreted it as rape. I'm not sure whether there is a right and wrong answer.
My interpretation of when she freaked out at the psychiatrist when she was really grilling her about her sexual knowledge, my interpretation was of that, why she freaked out, was because her mother used to burn her genitals with a cigarette, and the psychologist at that point, the psychiatrist, had a cigarette in her hand, and she went to embrace her or whatever.
No, I think Gail is referring, correct me, Gail, to the second hypnosis, Isabel.
Yes.
In Act 2.
Yes,
basically, Gail. Basically, over there, what happened is that obviously here a certain amount of artistic interpretation comes into play as well. The way we saw it was that there was a bit of an interplay between the different realities that she was experiencing, both her memory of what happened on the night and both what was happening in the room there and then. So we played a bit with that phrase that you have mentioned, get away from me. Is she referring to the man? Is she possibly referring to Mother Superior, who was possibly coming in and out of the room to intervene, who was also in a state of panic? Is she referring to Mother Superior there and there in the here and now? We left it ambiguous on purpose. Obviously, the script doesn't really tell you, although the author does give a lot of side notes, but in this case, left it in our hands to interpret.
Yeah.
That's just to give a bit of background and answer.
I mean, the reason why I kind of came to that conclusion was because of her last speech, where she talks about this man who sang to her for 6 days, and on the 7th day he came to her room and he lay on top of her, and sort of that was to me it's quite plausible that if somebody knows nothing about sex at all, and it's your first experience, she might have actually fancied him, and maybe he did take advantage of her. I suppose it could have been a rape because she was so innocent. It wasn't a violent rape. That is my interpretation. It was maybe she was coerced into it, and she enjoyed it. And then, because of religion, religious perspectives, etc., etc., she felt ashamed, and then it led. I mean, she was experiencing these huge changes in her body as you know the pregnancy was sort of progressing, and then you know birth is a traumatic experience, even in normal circumstances when you know what's happening to you. But imagine somebody who is so innocent and she's going through this enormous experience. So I don't know, in that second hypnotism, to me it was more a case of, you know, she was really upset at the whole thing, that this massive change that happened to her physically, apart from obviously emotionally and psychologically.
So I have a small comment from Carlo, and then Jevin would also like to add his thought.
So regarding these last 2 points, even I thought that it was the result of an innocent sexual encounter and not a rape. Perhaps I'm influenced also by the movie and by the play, and also by the original script, and also because of the repeated reference to it was a mistake. It was a mistake. But I would like to make my main point on what Isabel was saying about the religious experience, perhaps, of Mother Superior, who probably was on such an important spiritual journey, whom she herself probably she was accepting faith very naively for a very long part of her life. Until then, she encountered so many problems in her life that led her to perhaps even lose her faith. In fact, at a certain point, she says, I'm even doubting God. When after she became Mother Superior, she realized that she was the mother of 2 disgruntled daughters, and a widowed mother, and also doubting God. Now that is something that perhaps, and that's why they are all 3 characters are on a spiritual journey, I think. And therefore, they're all at different stages. And perhaps that's why I think that Dr. Livingston is the one who does the greatest move forward in her faith. I was also looking at their names. I don't know whether you can do this as well and give some interpretation to their names. Mother Miriam Ruth. Miriam is the one who saves Moses. Ruth is the one in the Old Testament who goes and accompanies her mother-in-law, who's widowed, for the rest of her life.
Wow. Okay.
While I don't know whether that, so I was saying, yes, that's what she did. She tried to save her niece, while Miriam saved Moses, her brother, from the Nile, and she saved, and she went and she accompanied the wife of Boaz for the rest of her life, her aging mother-in-law.
How interesting.
Then you also have then you also have Dr. Malta Livingston. Martha, who's the one who first doubts that Jesus can ever raise her brother Lazarus from the dead. But then she tells him, you are the life, the Son of the living God. It is one of the strongest statements of faith in the whole of the gospel.
Oh.
And then you also have Livingston, living stones, representing the church. I don't know whether I'm stretching it too much. But the church, I mean, and then finally, obviously, Agnes of God, she who is offered as the sacrificial lamb. And in fact, Mother Miriam Root mentions that reference as well. She says, why should this person be sacrificed? Or the psychiatrist say something like that. Why should this person be sacrificed? Because of her God, something like that.
Thank you, Carlo.
Coincidence, you know,
No,
those names. I'm sure that the playwright did his research about that.
Definitely,
yeah. So Jevin has been waiting for a while. So
hi, no, it's perfectly fine. I hope I have something to contribute to this discussion. I can only speak about what I saw yesterday. I haven't seen the movie, I've never read the play or the adaptation. So it's basically from what I saw during the play yesterday and what you've been discussing. And to be fair, I cheated a bit. I read a bit this morning because I was interested to know more about this whole play. Incidentally, Livingston also happens to be an infamous Victorian explorer who, because of him, most of Africa was exploited. So to go back to the play with words, maybe if it's Livingston with an N, not with an E at the end, it's not Livingstone, but it would be, I think, Henry Morton Stanley had met him somewhere in Africa, and he's one of the nowadays vilified a bit explorers. It was of him, Africa wouldn't have been so much exploited. But anyway, there could be Livingston the explorer, so to speak.
No, Jevin, it's interesting because the first line that Mother Superior says is a reference to that. She comes in, if you remember properly, and she says, Dr. Livingston, I presume, which is exactly what was said to
Stanley when he met him.
himself.
Yes, okay. That escaped me. I have a few points and maybe a few comments as well to make. To be fair, I don't think religion has anything to do with this play. Not the way I'm seeing it. Maybe I'm being a bit too reactive. I think of God, Agnes of God, is a bit of a red herring. Because thinking a bit about it, to me, it seems to be now, looking back, so to speak, from an audience perspective, I think we have here society encapsulated in the psychologist, psychiatrist, and the Mother Superior who represents the church. Basically, they both represent both parts of society, so to speak. No, the people who decide, the people who are in charge, and they both seem to make, despite their efforts, a whole mess of the situation. So I think the focus is rather than a religious background and how mysticism, etc., can help or undo a person. It's more how the society we live in, at least in the Western world, because religion plays a big part of it. The people who are in charge, or the people who are supposed to take care of the land, so to speak, or the sheep, do a mess of the whole situation. You know, so on the one hand, Dr. Livingston is trying to fight her demons, the way I see it. So she's drawn into this case more like from an egoistic perspective to find herself. And Mother Superior, who this failed mother, failed housewife, if I can say so, who's had her own children, she made a whole mess out of it. Now, all of a sudden, is in charge, is given charge of more land, so to speak, in her convent to take care of. So it's already, you can compare this to politicians as well. You've already messed up elsewhere in your life or in a previous legislature, you know, and all of a sudden now you're being entrusted with another ministry, with another portfolio, okay? So I think the fact that it happens in a convent is just coincidental. It's part of the setting, really. The Mother Superior could have been an army sergeant, an army colonel, somebody who's taking care of boarding students, perhaps, you know, somebody who's in charge of a factory, or, you know, somebody who has people under their care, so to speak. Maybe factory is not that correct, but somebody who has people under their care. So this person has already failed in life, has been entrusted with taking care of more people, and yet failing once again. That's my take on the mystical part, or the religious part, so to speak. What I also found maybe interesting, because we're talking about murder as well here, and again, not having read the novella or seen the movie, is it really murder if well, let's put it this way: Agnes knew that she was killing the baby, right? She put the umbilical cord around its neck. And we don't know if it's a boy or a girl, actually. Maybe if it's a girl, it would have been even...
No, it's a girl. It's a girl. She says, there's
she
one
says
reference where she says her chooses
okay,
her.
I don't want to sound misogynist. It's not my point here. You know, so we have these women who are, so to speak, failing. Each generation failing the next generation of girls, of women. You have the mother who has failed Agnes. Agnes has failed her offspring. The mother, rather than killing Agnes, gave her a very hard time in her life. Agnes is trying to actually help this baby by giving it back to God. So does Agnes do a worse job than her mother? The fact that Agnes has killed the baby not to make it suffer the way she has suffered in life. Is she trying to, so to speak, close off the suffering she has received from her mother, so to speak? So I see a chain reaction happening. So I think in the case of Agnes killing the child at the end of the day is her way of reacting of so to speak, with the foreknowledge now that she knows what she had to go through herself, and she doesn't want her child to suffer in the same way. And it happens to be another daughter. So could this be the case that the way it develops? I think those are the two main foci. The fact that Agnes tries to put her child out of its misery, so to speak, for it not to suffer the same way she has suffered at the hands of her mother. For all I know, even her aunt maybe came from a dysfunctional family as well, because they all seem to have maybe psychological or mental problems. And I'm not sure, Tyrone, if Agnes has a father as well, if he's ever mentioned, so to speak, within the drama.
In the Mother Superior says that it could have been anyone from a number of men. So we get this impression that the mother of Agnes was very promiscuous, or at least she had many relationships. So there's no idea. In fact, the whole idea of the absent male is also another strong thing, which probably we'll be tackling on the webinar on Thursday. Because
so we have an absent male in the case of her father, and an absent male in the case of her offspring, so to speak, as well. So it's, in a way, it's history repeating itself. I think that is one of the main themes, maybe, that I don't know if has been discussed, but which struck me, and also the fact that the other two characters represent, in my opinion, society in general. Here they are talking about their own problems. They seem to care about Agnes, but not so much. But it's actually this fight, this contrast, so to speak, between the main pillars of society, in this case, religion or rather the sacred and the profane. I see it less mystical. I see it more or religious. I see it more of a fact that the institutions, so to speak, religion and not the state in this case, but yeah, it could be the state, have let down Agnes. Thank you.
Thank you, Jevin. I think that's a very interesting point. For example, the one that you mentioned, how the parents or the family situation of the Mother Superior and her sister probably was also very problematic, given that this child from 6 years old onwards says her life was bleak, and probably she got married quite early because her sister wasn't even born yet. And of course, her sister then ran off quite early as well. So it's probably the case that it was not a very happy situation. And interestingly as well, it seems that the convent itself for Agnes wasn't very welcoming. So we said Agnes relied on religion. If the nuns made her feel welcome, of course, we don't know if this was a reaction from Agnes or if it was true, but she might have had some help through friendship. But she says that the nuns were jealous of her. So she didn't even feel well with respect to the other nuns. So we don't know if there was this Sister Margaret in the background, for example, who eventually called the police and who was aware of what is going on. So Mother Superior and Agnes might had this kind of, they were trying to hide this from the rest of the nuns in a way, but there were these nuns who were maybe curious and trying to discover stuff. Okay, so I know that Robert Falzoni has some comments. Up to you, Robert.
Yeah, just I'm trying to sum up all the thoughts, which is quite difficult, but I don't feel, well, I never felt that we were dealing with a mystical experience here. So in as much as I don't think that it's a mystical experience, it's not a religious issue. However, the fact that the setting is religious, it is not indifferent to the play. I mean, religion surely affected the way that the characters treated the issue. And I'm saying this because there were some comments earlier about seeing religion as controlling and being raised up, that sort of attitude, that sort of mentality. And well, that was my experience as well. Now, I'm a Salesian priest. Up till my adolescence, my experience was also of religion being very rigid, telling you what to do, what not to do, until I changed my perspective and looked at faith more in terms of a relationship. And I think relationships here are key, because if we think about it, all three characters have been heavily wounded in their past, in their relationships, and very important relationships. We have the psychiatrist who at one point talks of her affair with her love affair with the French Maurice, if I remember the name correctly, and her complicated relationship with her mother and losing her sister. Of course, Mother Superior as well. I mean, she's disowned by her own daughters, failed motherhood, and of course, Agnes. So, now, the thing is that, yes, one would ask, how do these wounds affect the way that they look at God? And in consequence, how they behave during the plot of the play? How does that affect their treating Agnes's story? And just one last point, so that I won't talk again, leave space further. It's, I like this dialogue between faith and less faith, let's put it that way, believers and non-believers, centering around the story. Because, yeah, looking at faith as a relationship, no relationship is fixed. There's always a story to relationship. So I think that this is the it's a brilliant idea to center this discussion on a story.
Thank you, Robert. So I don't see any hands raised, but
yes, Christian, there is Jan. He's physically raising his hand.
Okay, Jan, go ahead.
So what I found very interesting was like, on the one hand, before I go to my general view of the play, was the question about Agnes being guilty or not guilty, like the question whether we can at least call it murder or not. Because there was this question, my answer on this was that there is like a detail which is maybe small but very important to me in this play, when she describes how she killed the baby. I mean, we know that the baby came into the bin and died inside, but she describes how she strangled the baby, how she put something around her, the sheet around the throat. So
The
the
umbilical cord, yeah.
Yeah, so she didn't just throw it into the bin. She really wanted to kill it, and that's why she strangled it. So definitely, she didn't just throw it away because she didn't want to have it. It means she really wanted it to die. So then, this is the first point for me, which is very important. The second point is that the fact, why did she do it? We talked about the fact, okay, she I think in the play she said she wasn't worth to have it, which is very important for me. But what I find very interesting in general about the character is that I think we won't ever come to any point of saying, is she guilty, not guilty, because we actually don't come to any conclusions. It's the same with the fact when she says the nuns are jealous on me. It's a little bit the same, because why does she want to kill the baby? Why are the nuns jealous? She doesn't tell us. So she's like I don't think that we deal with mysticism in this play. The only mystical thing is Agnes herself, because we will never get any answers. And this is, in my opinion, because she is in between two very big subjects. And this is, on the one hand, of course, the church, and on the other side, of course, the science, logic things, psychiatry. And I think it is not only the subjects itself, it's not only about religion and psychology, but it is about those two subjects gone sour. Because we have actually two persons, the Mother Superior, and we have the psychologist, which are, when we look back to their past, which were just the same persons but switched roles. The psychologist's past is described as a religious past, and the Mother Superior's past is described as a past which doesn't have connection to religion. This is very interesting and very important to me, I think. So we see twice in the play both subjects gone sour, in the past of both of them, and then in the present. But also in present it doesn't work when they switch roles. So this shows us actually the criticism of the author on both of the subjects, because now we have the psychologist who, as I thought when I watched the play, didn't manage to do her job from the first minute. It doesn't mean, of course, that it was great played, but we could see from the first minute that she doesn't manage to do her job, because she doesn't know how to talk to the Mother Superior without hiding that she really doesn't like her. And then we have the Mother Superior, who definitely tells us that it is, or what means definitely, but who really lets us know that it's not about God for her, not in any way. In my opinion, God is, like you actually, Ms. Warrington, said, God and belief is her last resort. But I think if she could take something different, she would also take something different. because actually it's a little bit selfish what she presents us. She's really, she appears selfish because she just wants peace for herself. Of course, for Agnes too, yeah? But she takes care of Agnes because she needs something in her life that fulfills her. So in the end, this is to me very interesting. That we see those two characters described in two steps in their lives, that they are not getting on with their life, and then they switch roles, and then we see that both characters didn't manage with both subjects to live a good life. And this is very important because it shows us and it proves that both characters tried both. And this is the most important proof to me, to show that we have to criticize both sides.
Yeah, thank you, Jan. So I have a comment from Carlo, and then we go to Ryan.
Okay, so I really enjoyed listening to Jevin, Robert, and Jan. I'd like to see some connections between them, in particular with regard to so Jevin said this is not that much about God, but it is more about the institutions of the state and of the church. Agreed. However, on another level, I think that the question of God comes in when the question of suffering comes in. And this is something that Robert, I think, referred to indirectly when he was mentioning woundedness, that all three characters are wounded. And I think, and in fact, this is so. I mean, believers start questioning their faith many times when they encounter the mystery of suffering in life. And non-believers many times as well start dealing with the question of God when they encounter suffering, or for example, the death of a loved one. There are these changes in life, perhaps, that sometimes can bring us to really dialogue, or they bring us to have points of contact between believers and non-believers. And perhaps this is perhaps the most important point related to faith, in my opinion, between these three characters, the fact that they all encounter suffering in some way or another, and that is where the question of God is challenged, either on one side or on the other.
Yes, in fact, Carlo, this is one of the reasons why we chose this play, because at the end of the day, these are all central human experiences, and at the end of the day, believing or not believing, we have to deal with our existence, and lots of questions come up, and we have to sort of decide how to live at the end of the day. Okay, so Ryan.
Hey, thanks. Thanks for the whole production. So I really enjoyed it. Just 3 points. I'll try not to repeat myself. 3 main things that kind of stuck from this discussion for me. The first one is kind of a personal journey as well as in a personal agenda for me. We spoke a bit about the sexual encounter, whatever you want to call it, although that's the problem for me that Agnes had. So considering in any way consensual a relationship with someone that didn't have even the notion of what is consensual and not calling it rape, for me is a disservice in its own. So whether she was open or not, but the lack of knowledge and the lack of life experience and the lack of everything except what she had, which was zero knowledge on the subject, I can never consider that non-rape, let's put it this way. From my point of view, it's impossible. I struggle to even just consider it that way because of, that there was zero knowledge in Agnes about it. So that's a side note, but it kind of kept with me, and I wanted to kind of clear. Before we mention the point, and I think this was very interesting, it was mentioned mostly about Mother Superior, but I think it can be extended, which is the idea that she was doing everything from a place of good. So the starting point was, I want to do good. And pun intended maybe, but sometimes we say the quote, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And I think this metaphor of wanting to do good, which is fine, but does it give permission that in order to do good, we kind of sometimes overstep what is ours and what should be referred to other people? And unfortunately, this is something that I've seen and I've discussed throughout my experience as well, both in my work and in my previous engagements in life. That sometimes with this notion of good intention, we kind of give ourselves permission to be okay with just knowing a bit, and we'll see how it goes. And I think that's very dangerous. And it's very dangerous. It's even more dangerous when we're looking at a platform in our society where we're moving towards professionalism in every aspect of life. And not even professionalism, but specialized professionalism nowadays. So having even the word of voluntary work, for example, the specialization of people that are specialized and properly trained to deal with certain things, then sometimes I feel it's a bit symptomatic in church institutions, but I don't want to highlight church institutions just because it's a topic, but in some institutions in general, that amateurism is kind of okay because we're doing it with a good heart. I think that's very dangerous. This is my belief, obviously, but I think it's something that is very, very dangerous. Having said that, so I don't just knot it with the church. A big problem throughout, and I think the most clear cases were Mother Superior and the psychiatrist, were the enmeshment of roles. So all of them had layers of roles with no distinction whatsoever. So you had the primary caregiver, but also the Mother Superior, but also the faith companion, all in one person, dealing with a sensitive situation of a vulnerable person with a potentially criminal situation. On the other hand, a psychiatrist with the past experiences that clearly were undealt with. So I think that's something that the psychiatrist and people working health professions, as we know, we need to keep on going with therapy, and also try to, as much as possible, bracket our own things and not enmesh them in what we're working with. So all this enmeshment is what is probably making me struggle to say whether this was something related to religion or not, because everything was so enmeshed. People had so many hats at the same time. Okay, it was 3 roles, so the 3 roles were very loaded, and it was very difficult to determine, for example, the psychiatrist creating boundaries. I think, I don't know if I mentioned it just now, I think it was Jan, I'm not sure. This idea that the psychiatrist from the beginning couldn't make the boundary of the profession that I'm working with my patient. She just couldn't. And you just, this personal kind of competition with the psychiatrist left her, even, for example, as part of the hypnosis, you can stay if you want. Again, boundary. So there was a whole enmeshment issue, which I think created this wanted confusion, as in this multiplicity of roles, this number of heads going on and off, which created more this kind of Maltese would say and it's too much enmeshed together.
To tie in with what you've said, Ryan, there are 2 very short sentences in the play which are said by the 2 respective characters that really summarize this, and they're both said towards the end in that state of commotion that happens in the hypnosis. The psychiatrist tells Mother Superior, she belongs to me. So you're seeing this girl in this really bad situation, and what the psychiatrist is interested in is that she belongs to me. Whereas Mother Superior shortly afterwards tells her, don't do this to me. So once again, this meanness, which ties in with the enmeshment that you've been talking about,
Mm-hmm.
shows how wounded, in fact, both of them are.
Mm-hmm. Gail, I was seeing you nodding. I don't know if you want to add something to this.
I'm really pleased to be hearing these discussions. I think there's such valid contributions. Each and every one of you had something really valid to say. With regards to, I unfortunately didn't take notes. But with regards to Ryan, the last speaker, definitely there's a huge enmeshment from the get-go. There's a breach of boundaries from the very start, where Mother Superior insists on being spoken to rather than the patient at first. And of course, there's a bit of a battle of wits there, and then she still entertained her, pero as a therapist, I would say, listen, do you mind leaving the room and bringing my patient in at that point, But she entertained it, and it grew. This enmeshment grew as now naturally, again, it's for the benefit of the viewers, but it's so palpable. I agree. I also love the comparison between it being a normal situation, as in the situation, I believe it was Jan who made it, who said it's just like the real world. It's just a battle between religion and science, like two powers, and there's a situation in between, and everyone's interpreting it from their own perspective, and everyone's missing the wood for the trees, which was a very interesting take, in my opinion. There was something else I heard, and I thought, how interesting. Yes, somebody said, was she doing? I think it was Jevon, who said, was she doing a disservice to the baby, or was she doing it out of? Was she actually breaking the intergenerational trauma? We can see this child. She knew there was no way she was going to be able to raise it. That we saw she was not raised well at all. Her mother, by the fact that she was an abusive person, and her own sister as well, age 6, lost her spirituality, which is a very young age at which to lose your spirituality. We are led to believe that there was something happening in that household as well, for both the children, both the daughters, Mother Superior and her sister, to have ended up the way they ended up. So there's a huge case for intergenerational trauma. I don't think it was sexist at all of you to say. I mean, we are faced with an all-woman cast, and I think it's deliberately that the intergenerational trauma is from female to female here, although it is exceptionally common. You're right. Did she break the chain of the trauma there? She actually broke the chain of propagation of the species. She actually stopped. She killed the child. They can no longer have any more children. So with regards to it, I agree fully with Ryan. As in, even if it was consensual sex, it's definitely rape. I don't think that Agnes was in any position to consent to sexual relations with anybody. I can't remember what else I heard some very interesting comments. So thank you.
Thank you, Gail. So I think it's Alex's turn now.
Hello, pero jiena ħan esprimi ruħi bil-Malti.
It's okay.
Okay. Jiena bħala spettatur oġbitni u laqtitni ħafna l-play. Rajtom kollha li kellhom issues kif insomma kulħadd jaf kien hemm min għażel ir-reliġjon jew Alla u kien hemm min abbandunah biex ikkopja ma' dan l-issues. Però li bdejtu tgħidu l-ewwel jekk kienx ikun aħjar għal Agnes li ma tidħolx fil-kunvent imma naħseb kważi irrelevanti għax qisha rajta tragic figure bil-ewwel di. U li kieku ma daħlitx il-kunvent naħseb kienet jew issir xi abuser bħal omma għaliex ma rajtx insomma fl-ambjent li kienet tgħix li dik kienet se tfittex xi għajnuna. Il-psychiatrist daħlet taħt l-ordni tal-qorti għax kieku ħadd ma kien ifittxa. Li hija kważi ir-realtà tal-ħajja ta' ħafna. Li kien hemm li qal Ryan they were wearing so many hats. Naħseb hija realtà wkoll ta' nies li jkunu fil-management xi kultant trid tikkopja fuq affarijiet li huma tekniċi u affarijiet oħra li tiddilja mal-persuna nnifisha, speċjalment jekk tkun taħdem xi kumpanija żgħira illi m'għandekx il-lussu li jkollok xi HR kbir, etc. U fil-fatt kien hemm xi ħadd ieħor li semma li di qisha naħseb Jevin. Xi ħaġa tas-soċjetà mhux biss ta' reliġjon dil-play. Li rajt illi din Agnes ġiet irrejpjata darbtejn, darba minn xi ħadd u Agnes isa irrifjutat il-fatti u darba oħra mill-psychiatrist jew therapist fl-aħħar jiġifieri fejn biex ngħidlek fetħitilha orizzonti jew moħħha u she couldn't deal with it sakemm mbagħad qatlet lilha nfisha. Rigward Agnes ħassejt li vera li hi kienet temmen li laħqet ċertu mistiċiżmu f'ħajjitha. Anka l-fatt li ridet tgħix bl-ostja biss u il-mother jien fil-play ħassejta li ma kienitx oppressive. U qabel ma mort nara din play, ħsibt li ħajkun hemm din l-idea ta' oppressive church li bdejtu semmu, però ma ħarġitx mill-play, pjuttost kienet il-mother ħarġet isa Fil-fatt meta bdiet she was enforcing her own how do you say opinion whatever biex issalva din Agnes biex tiekol u biex to get real speċi. Li rajt dil-play kienet illi Agnes kienet qiegħda b'xi mod tikber bħala fl-aspett spiritwali magħluqa ġol konvent sakemm il-ħażen jew evil was from the outside. Meta evil as rape came from the inside, everything broke down. And it broke all the three persons involved. Li tfakkarni fil-film The Village jisu fuq l-istess aspett mexa. Din ukoll rajta li xi kultant il-Knisja mhux xi kultant il-Knisja tbati bih illi tinforzana b'ċertu ideoloġiji li fl-opinjoni tiegħi huma tajbin biex nikbru. Però meta evil speċi is from within, it is at a loss.
Thank you, Alex, for your comments. I don't know if there are any other reactions. There are some voices which we haven't heard yet.
I have a question, if I could.
Of course.
None of us spoke, or we kind of missed the whole issue regarding the stigmata. I don't know, maybe yourself, Christian, or Tyron have anything to say about it, because I think the scope of the stigmata at the end is to give so to speak, leave us with a bigger question mark. I don't know if you've had anything to say about that, because I think I'd be interested to hear that. There's another point as well. Again, maybe I'm wondering now. My mind is on a roll. This whole affair reminds me a little bit about the whole affair, albeit the other way around, with Santa Maria Goretti. This very simple girl, beginning of 20th century, was actually stabbed rather than give in to this young guy, a little years older than her, who wanted to have sex with her, and she obviously, because of religion, continued to deny him, and eventually he killed her. This is, again, maybe I'm thinking too much into the whole background to the story. It gives me the idea as well. It's a bit the reverse over here. What's happening? I'm seeing Tyron as well nodding. Maybe you can enlighten me a bit about this fact. I don't know.
So let's start with this.
Okay, go ahead. Okay, so just a comment about this thing. I think the playwriter just put in every argument, every kind of miracle that have been identified by the church. He put it there, sort of like there is this of the stigmata, the virgin birth, it's there. There is also a very interesting, there is a small discussion about the word begot. I don't know, it's kind of out of context when it comes to, but it reminded me of the case of Bernadette. So Bernadette, the church approved her sightings as true because she came up with a word that she didn't know, which was the Immaculate Conception, today's feast actually. And the church really used that argument, saying that this girl couldn't have come up with this word, so it must be the Virgin Mary. So anything that has been used in history to in favor of an argument in favor of God is thrown in the play. And it seems kind of to tell us, if you want to believe, you can find any excuse to believe. If you don't want to believe, nothing will convince you. And that's very interesting. And also, what is a miracle? It comes also out in the play. So at least when I used to teach in Museo many years ago, we used to say that a miracle is something that science cannot explain. And I remember like being taught that the church used to go to a scientist, for example, or a doctor, for example, at Lourdes, when there are people getting better from their sickness, and the medical doctor or the scientist would say, okay, this is I can't explain it, so probably it's a miracle by your definition. But of course, it's interesting that the more science advances, the domain of what is a miracle by this definition will shrink. So there is also this idea of what a miracle is or is not, or whether it is even possible, sort of, whether it goes against the laws of nature, which I don't think it does. So
yeah,
up to you, Tyron.
No, basically I'm very much in line with what Chris said. So the stigmata, besides obviously the theatrical and aesthetic value of it, we won't go into how long it took us to figure out how that effect was going to be done on stage. Many trials and errors. I'm seeing Izzy smiling over there. But apart from that, I think it's exactly what Chris is saying, that on one hand, you can say, oh, she's bleeding blood, so it must be mystical, it must be an intervention of the divine. But on the other hand, and I'm sure that Gail can obviously back us up with a lot of theoretical framework over here, it can be self-induced. So many things can be self-induced. And although we do not have any scientific straight-jacketed answers to it, on the other hand, as was mentioned in the place itself, through hysteria, through self-inducement, these things could happen. So basically, for every argument that there is in the play being proposed that could tilt towards a supernatural intervention, there is the counter-argument. I think what the play is all about, as I was mentioning before, is this invitation to be more grounded and to deconstruct certain illusions or certain strongholds that one can have that deviate a person from being grounded. Regarding Santa Maria Goretti, I must admit it, as a figure, I was never too enthusiastic about her. Possibly she's always been presented as this very trivialized character that I could never really relate to. So over there, Jeff, and I'm afraid I don't really have much to comment. I do hope that our Agnes was portrayed in a deeper way than, unfortunately, sometimes Maria Goretti tends to be portrayed. I'm sure there's a much deeper story to that as well. But unfortunately, sometimes going back to my childhood, she was portrayed as this girl who was almost like a superwoman, sort of a supergirl, sort of. So I cannot say I can really see that association there.
Okay, so I have a comment from Jan at this point.
Yes, concerning the miracles of church with the virgin birth and the stigmata and all this. Actually, the combination of all of the different miracles to me appeared like, yeah, something that made the whole investigation even more ridiculous, or not the investigation, but the belief that it could be something supernatural. Because so first, the fact that the Mother Superior believed in the fact, or not believed that. Let me start again. First, the fact that we had stigmata, and now we're talking right now about stigmata that nobody has ever seen except Agnes, because they were covered in the play. And the Mother Superior also didn't bring her to hospital, so probably she never saw the wound. And here we are talking about a miracle that was experienced by Jesus. The next miracle is a miracle that was experienced by Maria. So we are talking about two completely different persons of the Bible, and suddenly they are combined within a small girl, which is to me like a very ridiculous thing, and very like almost overdriven, like it's too much, it's exaggerated. And that showed to me, that was actually to me the answer of all these miracles. It is a very it shows the exaggerated way of explaining how Agnes could be innocent. It shows an exaggeration, actually, to me.
Can I add something here? This is what I was trying to portray in the beginning, in my opening, where I said I was getting increasingly frustrated because it was taking a religious turn, where it was very obvious that there was a murder and we should be investigating a murder. Like, why are we talking of mysticism? So I agree completely. It was the setting, I think, that first of all, they started, I don't know whether anyone mentioned it because my daughter needed a bit of attention there, but there was the fact that she was singing with a beautiful voice, and Mother Superior was convinced that it was the voice of somebody else, that it was some mystical experience, that it was somebody taking over her body. There's the stigmata. So I think it's the setting that alluded to the religion and to everybody getting caught up in this cloud of mysticism. Had it happened in any other setting, I don't think there would have been any thought of mysticism.
So I'm seeing there are some people. Okay, Robert, go ahead.
No, I'm just thinking, I'm going in a different direction from what's been said right now, but at one point came to my mind that in fact there was another baby in the plot. At one point, Dr. Livingston, when she's talking about her past, says that she has become pregnant at one point. Then we don't know what happens to the baby. She stops as if she's blocking her monologue. So we don't really know, but it must have been quite difficult for her because she doesn't find the words how to continue to say what had happened. And I'm wondering whether this, when towards the end of the play, then she discovers that in fact it was not, the baby had not been murdered by someone else, because the play somehow leads us to understand that the psychiatrist had been thinking that someone else came in and murdered the baby. Even the gestures, this must have been the choice of the production, but the gestures of the actors, the looks that the psychiatrist gave the Mother Superior at one point, as if trying to look if there are any reactions to what the hypnosis was bringing up. I felt when I was watching the play that it came as a surprise that in fact it was Agnes herself who killed the baby, and not some other nun or someone else who came in and killed the baby. And I don't know if that has to do somehow with her final comment about being touched and that being a miracle, sort of somehow Dr. Livingston is questioning the faith. I don't know that sort of connection is being made. You know, her own life story, somehow losing a child. We don't know if it's deliberate or not, or what has happened. And seeing that this novice, Agnes, kills her child, whether on purpose or not, that's what we were talking about. But
yes, in fact, I assume that it was probably an abortion that took place there.
But we're not sure of it.
Yes, and also the dream that she had, where a small baby was pulling her inside a woman's womb. It was also very telling there. So it seems that she's still grappling probably with some guilt, and then she says, "What I could have done with a baby." Then she was continued thinking. Yes, that was a very interesting part as well. Okay, we have time for maybe 1 or 2 other interventions, and then we start concluding. Okay. So unless there is someone else, so I suggest that we conclude as the same way we started, by giving word to Carlo and Gail. And so it's up to you. We have a few minutes left.
Okay, so what stayed with me from this conversation was this word grounded, something that Tyrone mentioned, but then also, I mean, you're all coming from very practical points of views and work. I mean, Gail from her work as a psychologist, and all of you were all speaking from your own personal experience. So I was also struck a lot from by what Ryan mentioned, rape. The definition of rape, perhaps we're still too much, you reminded me, and you're very right, that we're too much bound to a very narrow definition of rape. But as you're saying, when it's, even though it might seem as though it is consensual, in this case, definitely one can define it as rape. And what you mentioned as well about voluntary work. To me, it's something that always keeps coming back to me whenever we're discussing all this, is that it isn't simply about the question of the existence of God or the mystical aspect, but it goes much more than this. It is about how we deal with life in general, and the church as well. The church is also as an institution. I think that is something I found myself thinking a lot about the church as an institution. How many times either the church or everyone, sometimes we use God to fill in the gaps, which can sometimes lead us to erroneous answers, instead of really trying to deepen our relationship with God and creating a community which can help ourselves and others grow from our wounds. That's it, basically. Thank you.
You know, what I took, first of all, thank you all for your contributions once again. It's been a very, very interesting debate. But what I took from all this is we all see things from our own perspective, and it's okay to do so. It's just not okay to put your perspective onto others, so to speak. And in terms of the religious versus non-religious aspect, mush a little bit not religious. Most of us, the ones who are not religious, are not religious at all. But from the religious non-religious aspect, I like I said earlier, I feel that religion has a very important part in society. I just think that it can be dangerous if given responsibilities that are not within its remit. For example, as happened here with this Mother Superior, doing good is not enough for you to want to be involved in a criminal investigation. Wanting to protect somebody is not enough. That in wanting to be to hinder a psychiatric evaluation. Doing good was not enough for you not to call a doctor to protect her or to send her for psychological. And this is, she was acting out of her remit there. And I feel that in society, this happens a lot. Jekk trid nelabora ġifieri, per eżempju, I had one particular client that I can think of, but she wasn't the first, and I'm pretty sure she's not going to be the last, whose husband actually, beat her in front of her parents, who are deeply religious, who brought the parish priest, who told her not to leave her husband because she's breaking the marriage. And obviously she ended up, she listened at first, and then she ended up much worse, and then she ended up in therapy, in clinics, and at a psychiatrist and a psychologist. And it's not okay for a priest, for example, to give marriage advice based on that. You can say, look, our religion says this, our religion says that. But come on, a woman's safety. I mean, her own parents usually were at fault first and foremost. But also, I would have expected at least a priest, somebody who's a learned scholar, to turn around and say, "Look, she's in danger. Let her leave." No, he actually intervened and convinced her to stay. So it can be extremely dangerous. This is like me giving religious advice. I'm not equipped to do so at all, and I won't. Okay. I believe there's a question. Chris, do you wanna?
But Ryan, you want to add to say something?
Sorry, just on top of what Gail was saying about DV or domestic violence. I work with a different client base, kind of. My work is in therapy as well. And when it comes to gender and sexuality issues, for example, we've seen a lot of improvement, so I don't want to be negative. We've seen a lot of improvement, openness, ability to refer. So let's call a spade, and we're seeing
there are many
people that are collaborating. Having said that, we've collected a lot of pieces as well as we went along, and we're still collecting pieces from, I would call them non-informed advice. Let's put it this way, non-informed advice. So again, it's a matter of good intentions, but when not informed thoroughly, it can create a lot of pain and damage, which is longer lasting, because then even working with the family will become more complicated. So just wanted to adapt on what Gail was saying practically.
Yes, and by no means am I saying that this is just something that religion does. A lot of different professionals intervene in other people's jidħlu fl-għalqa ta' xulxin bil-Malti. But we are talking about religion, and I do know that there are at least 2 priests among us, so it would be worth bringing it up. It's okay to speak from the perspective of your religion, of course, but not okay to go into the remits of other people, because it could cause a lot of harm. I mean, we don't go into remits between one branch of psychology and another, from like into psychiatry or psychology as a priest, for example. And I don't blame them. I mean, even in my lifetime, the priest was the go-to person for everything when I was a kid. So I don't blame people who are hard pressed and whose brains are hardwired to think this way. But perhaps it's time to start educating the people and the clergy towards this end.
I mean, if I may, that's why I mentioned the institution and also culture. Sometimes they're so much enmeshed into each other that, as you're right, we tend to make a mistake. And the thing is, when we do not teach people to deal with the church in a healthy way as well.
Jan, you want to add something?
Yes, first, thank you very much for the views of you. I would be interested to get to know a little bit more of reflection of the scientific part, because we had right now a lot about the church, but I would also be interested about the reflection of the scientific part, which was also presented as, let's say, improvable.
By scientific part, Jan, do you mean the psychological part?
Yes, I mean the psychological part, yeah.
Were you here in the beginning, in my opening, or did you come after that?
Actually, so then maybe I missed something because
So what I observed myself, I see everything as a therapist, right? It's the hardest hat for me to take off.
Yeah.
I try, I do, but it's very hard for me to take off that. So, so when I was watching the play, what came to me was the deep-seated trauma, the deep-seated intergenerational trauma. Okay, so we've got a child who was sexually and psychologically abused by her mother, who was already promiscuous and became an abuser, whose sister was somehow lost her spirituality age 6, and then turned out to be a failed wife and mother to 2 people, and then went into the convent and became Mother Superior, and then failed the people inside the convent as well. So there was a lot of deep-seated intergenerational trauma. And the basis of the psychological basis was that. There was a lot of enmeshment, as Ryan very rightly pointed out, in the sense of we had the psychiatrist who was acting as a carer at some point. I think at some point she actually said, she's mine. And there was Mother Superior who was fluctuating between being an aunt, a mother superior, someone who's trying to get to the truth. There was a lot of enmeshment of roles. There was a huge break of boundaries from the get-go, as in Mother Superior first insisted that she be interrogated instead of the patient. So the psychiatric evaluation was of the patient, but Mother Superior is like, no, speak through me. I know what happened. She doesn't know what happened, which was, and the psychiatrist at first was like flustered, but then kept entertaining her. She didn't tell her to leave the room. Well, she did, but the Mother Superior remained there till the very end. So she was actually there during the hypnosis. So there was a huge enmeshment of boundaries there. From a psychological perspective as well. The child was not given any tools, Agnes being the child, was not given any tools to deal with the world. At one point we are told she was sheltered, and the only place she ventured eventually was to the convent. So she went from an abusive home into a convent. So she had nothing, no tools but the religion which she found in the convent with which to deal with her trauma. And of course, so therefore she saw it through the eyes of religion, where there was none to be seen, where it was the wrong lens, but it was the only lens she had. So there was a lack of tools with which to deal with the trauma, with any trauma really, with life. And of course, there was an accumulation of trauma, because at one point we said she was inept. She ended up murdering, as a matter of fact, but it was an accumulation. It was one thing leading to another. It gives me the sense, although I could be wrong, that had there been a break at any point in that chain from her abuse to her murdering her child, the murder would not have happened. And we see this a lot in trauma. We can identify literally the points which could have been avoided, right? I don't know whether I've answered your question.
My question would now especially be because we also talked a lot about the borders of religious belief and where are the problems right now in our society. So my question was that whether you also saw some borders of your profession or that were reached in this play, and whether you can put it on a more general, general view. So if you do you see anything to improve in your profession, in society, like we saw it now concerning religion? Do you understand what I mean?
I'm not sure. I hope I do. If I don't,
yes, we're running out of time, so
okay.
Just we just have a quick time, just 1 minute maybe from Gail, and we'll have to conclude.
Okay, I'm not sure whether I understood your question correctly. Whether there's anything that can be improved in my profession in relation to religion and religious.
No, in general, not in relation to religion, but in relation to society, because we saw that problems of religion, religious belief, and we said this is we said, okay, concerning religion, this is very problematic in our society now if we talk about religion. And those problems were shown very clearly in the play. But we also have the other side in the play. We have the side of the psychologist, which was like...
He's a psychiatrist.
Psychiatrist, yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yes, I see what you mean now. In a nutshell, I think this is very important. And I don't know anybody who doesn't do it, but it's very important to point it out that we do not bring our own beliefs into the session. So, for example, I use my clients' spirituality, religious belief, and whatever is important to them in a therapeutic manner for them. It's irrelevant what I believe. What I care about is what it means to my client. If my client comes to me and says, I'm seeing an apparition, I'm not there to say it happened or it did not. I'm there to assess what this apparition means, what my client is getting out of it, and then assess whether or not there is the potential for it to be something else, such as, for example, schizophrenia, for example, and then I would send her to be assessed for schizophrenia. But my first reaction is not, I'm atheist, you're definitely not seeing anything religious, to ship you off to a psychiatrist, you know?
Thank you. I don't know if Tyron wants to say something at this point.
No, not much, in the sense of I think it was a very beautiful opportunity for all of us to be here and to express our views. I really agree with what Gail said last, the importance of expressing one's perspectives without imposing them, but at the same time knowing one's boundaries. I think that's what it boils down to, that one knows what his or her remit is, especially in the professional life. And because whenever one does not respect boundaries, it always leads to the damage of the person that one is working with. So I really think that what Gail mentioned and other people mentioned is really important. But I think this is a fantastic opportunity, there were more of them, where people can get together and express in such a healthy way, even divergent opinions. I think it's a beautiful moment that we have shared together.
Yes, in fact, I would like to add to what Tyron is saying that we would have liked to involve many other people, but unfortunately, we found that sometimes some people would be afraid to join such a discussion just because there are people of the other end of the spectrum. And we've heard this actually directly said to us. Thankfully, we were sort of brave enough to come here, share our views. We did it very respectfully. We knew our borders, like we were saying here. And I think everyone, like this, everyone can learn and can grow and learn at the end of the day how to deal further, like with this mystery that we live in, that is our life. Thank you very much. It's been a big pleasure. Those of you who want to join us will have another webinar on Thursday. This time we'll be focusing more on femininity issues regarding the church and the history and how all this shows in Agnes of God. Okay, so thanks once again and have a nice evening.
Bye, good evening.
Thanks, Prosit.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.